Ladies and gentlemen, the Newton Nomadic Theater presents Story Slam.
I've taken a little bit of license with the theme, but I grew up in Syracuse, New York. I moved to Boston right out of college and stayed here, but I grew up in Syracuse with a very large extended family, and we spent a lot of time together with all my cousins and aunts and uncles growing up. And I always found living here that when I went back to Syracuse, I always said that I was going home. And the irony of that wasn't lost on me because I hated Syracuse. Yet I couldn't stop myself from saying I was going home. I hated Syracuse. I couldn't wait to get out of there. And despite getting married and buying a house in Newton and having kids, being an adult, I was going home. And that all changed about 10 years ago when my father died. He was sick for about 14 months, and I was going back and forth to Syracuse a lot. And I had been there for the few days before he died, and for his funeral, and for the Jewish mourning period of Shiva after he died. And it was time to come back to Newton, and I had to start my life again, and my kids had to get back to school, and it was time to come back to Newton. And it was really hard to leave. It was really hard to say goodbye to my mother and to say goodbye to my aunts, my father's sisters, and to get back in the car and come back to Newton. I felt like I was going to be a long way from home. It felt like I wasn't going home. It felt like I was leaving home, and it was tough. It was a really tough thing to do, but I did it. I got in the car and I drove back to Newton. And when we got back here, we decided to have a Shiva minion at my house in Newton. And I don't know, people know what that is, but a minion is it's a quorum of 10 Jewish adults who come together to pray, and they're needed for to say certain prayers, one of them being the mourner's Kaddish, which is a prayer that I wanted to say to honor my father's memory. And we decided to have that at my house to conclude the Shiva period. And I agonized over this, which I'm prone to do, and because we had just finished a renovation on our house, and the living room was empty. We hadn't moved the furniture back in. We hadn't hung anything on the walls yet. And the house just wasn't where I wanted it to be, to have people in it. And so I just wasn't sure I wanted to do this. Plus, I didn't really want to call attention to my grief, and I wasn't great at asking for support, and I wasn't really comfortable with it. But people were asking how they could help, and it seemed like the appropriate thing to do. So we did it. My husband sent email and asked people to come, and we had the Shiva minion at my house, and people trickled in, and before I knew it, my house was packed with people. My living room was just filled with people, and my rabbi led the service, and we were I was just overwhelmed by, I was surrounded by all these people who were from all different walks of my life. There were people from my synagogue who I knew well and some who I didn't know very well. And there were people who I worked out with at the JCC and who, was sweated on the bike next to me and, spinning class. And the parents of my kids' friends and, and friends I had picked up along the way, and people who, I had just built this network that I didn't realize that I had built, and that I was taking for granted. And as we sang the prayer Aleinu, which is a central prayer in Judaism that anybody who's ever gone to Hebrew school knows. It's like the one prayer they're going to know. We sang it, and the sound just reverberated in the room because it was empty, and nothing on the walls and nothing on the floor, and it shook my soul. I mean, it's like I felt it so deeply, and I realized that I had built this community, and my husband and I had built this community here in Newton, and that I had built a home here in Newton, and I guess I had taken it for granted before and hadn't really realized it. And I was well into my 40s at this point, and I had never really appreciated it. And this was the first time I had I really realized it, and so it was this understanding that that I was home, and I was no longer far from home. I was home, and I don't think I have ever again referred to going to Syracuse as going home, and that's my story. So, and I urge you to buy my book about your home and mine, Newton.